Howdy friends, and welcome back to the channel. I know it's probably been a little while since we've seen each other, as I took a bit of a productive hiatus after the whole Bone Valley production that I did a little while ago. But if you take a look back here, we've got a whole North Pole set up at the good old Florida Railroad Museum. And that's pretty much what is taking up most of my time now, as we're in the very latter part of 2025. But alas, I have shot quite a few things over these past few months, quite sporadically, that I figured I could use this to kind of compile it all together into a here-all, be-all for this Q4 of 2025. As it's all been kind of stuff that I've shot on a day or two that I've been out, but it's never quite been enough to, make its own video. So it'll include some stuff from around here, some projects we've been working on, some random trains I've shot in the Bone Valley and other areas that I've just been around for. And so no real track to this one, but here's pretty much what I've been up to and will soon be up to as far as the last bit for 2025 goes. Hope you enjoy it.
First bit to catch up on here is a fan favorite from the museum getting a facelift. Pretty much the majority of this summer season has seen our shop allocate its resources towards repairing this old locomotive. In particular, our General Electric 44-ton center cab switcher. General Electric only built 386 of these unique locomotives from 1940 to 1956. This example built in January of 1953 for a Californian port authority. The machine would then undergo a major overhaul in October of 1989 to fit specifications requested by the U.S. Navy, who would then acquire the locomotive for their own car-moving necessities, serving time at the naval air stations at both Pensacola and Jacksonville before subsequent donation to the Florida Railroad Museum in 1995. The Railroad Museum would operate the locomotive for the next 2 decades or so, it proving very versatile for the occasional Willow Express, track maintenance, or yard switching operation. Though a leaking radiator on one of the engines and an electrical issue on the other put the locomotive out of service and on the sidelines for a good couple of years. Though with the time and resources now available to allocate towards it, this summer saw the number 100 in the shop for its grand facelift after over 30 years. This locomotive is quite versatile for the small operations that I mentioned. The 44-tonners were built with 2 prime movers inside, one on each side of the cab. In our case, the prime movers are twin Caterpillar 3306Bs, inline 6-cylinder engines that are often found inside semi-trucks and other large earth-moving equipment. Now, the majority of the 44-tonners weren't built with the Caterpillar components. Those were part of the overhaul that was done in 1989 by specification of the Navy. The engines are about 150 horsepower apiece, adding up to a 300 horsepower total. In the case, however, that you don't need both engines, you can always take one of them offline, cutting your fuel consumption in half. There's a number of scenarios where this locomotive will be able to help us out as a museum. And seeing it back in service after all this time with new paint is simply refreshing, as it will be the first coat of paint it will have seen since its overhaul in 1989. We'll touch back on the finished product of the 100 later towards the end of the video, but for now let's take a look at some moving trains.
Here's a little middle of work L700.
Tied rather closely to what we've just covered, this is one of those instances that kind of just happens. The date is September 12th. I was working in our museum's shop facilities this day and was on my way over to a sign manufacturing company located in Ruskin, crossing the CSX Palmetto subdivision in the process. The gates began lowering as I crossed the rails, so I pulled over and grabbed the camera. I was on my way to pick up the finished lettering and number decals for the 100 project and got caught by lowered gates on the way. Seeing as it was right about lunchtime, there was almost no mistaking what this train was to be, the northbound Tropicana Juice train. A nice surprise this early afternoon as CSX decided to send a pair of EMD SD70s down to Bradenton to haul this local back and forth. Alas, the L700 that we're seeing here, that which I've covered in many videos up to date, is nothing like the Tropicana Juice train we used to know years ago. The miscellaneous freight seen on the rear end tells the whole story. Precision scheduled railroading and a lack of financial justification to make the Tropicana Juice a single commodity train has seen the namesake Tropicana Juice train pretty much fade into history. But that following weekend I'd find myself on business over in Bartow, graced with a few trains to continue the evening.
Wow, It's gotta be. It's the 14th of September 2025 here, and after just getting out of a class just up the road at Polk State University's Bartow campus, I decided to see what I could catch trackside in the Bone Valley in the few hours of daylight we had remaining. I'd happened to run into the first catch just down State Road 60 before Mulberry. It was eastbound train B311. As covered in my Bone Valley production, B311 is the train shuttling the Dry Rock GR1 cars from Tampa's Rockport Yard to the Ridgewood processing plant and back to the bay. Here in this shot, they're shuttling the empty cars back to the chemical plant, and later on tonight, they'll return to Tampa Bay with finished phosphate loads. I figured since we were in the region, we could spend the majority of the evening checking out the Bone Valley and potentially catching some moves in areas not covered in the initial video. Though, despite what my Bone Valley production may have you believe, catching trains in this region is still very much a crapshoot. I'd say more now than it's ever been, so there wouldn't be much else to see for a few more hours. Although I did happen to know about a B307 that was currently running around down at Port Manatee, soon to bring a load of wet rock back to the processing plant at Ridgewood. Thanks to Bill Jones' extensive email to me after my Bone Valley production, I learned that the Port Manatee service had been running for about a year before I had caught it that first time, and while the service is only occurring about once a week at this point, as operational and contracting issues get sorted out between the Triad, Mosaic, CSX, and Kinder Morgan, the service should increase in frequency to about twice a week. And with the Bone Valley pretty much being completely quiet otherwise, I moved up the Valrico subdivision towards Edison. I moved to one of the 2 points at which Nichols Road intersects the Valrico subdivision, right next to Lwasse North America's Mulberry transload site. A bit of extended elevation made for a decent vantage as B307 now rolls eastward towards Ridgewood with about 70 carloads of nutrient-rich sand recently mined in a South American desert. With little to no action elsewhere in the Bone Valley this evening, B307 was the train to beat, across Nichols Road one more time and up to the control point of North End IMC. This is the mile or so long siding that runs eastward through Mulberry and is one of the first signaled points in the Bone Valley where trains can meet. While very infrequent that such an event will occur, the only other signaled siding in the entire Bone Valley is Ridgewood about 5 miles away. And there's a pretty decent gradient in the track uphill as trains roll into Mulberry, so it puts into perspective easily that even though it's sand, that's a lot of weight in tow. The GE-8 locomotives that seemed sparsely prevalent throughout my Bone Valley production have since by this point moved on, all having since been replaced in this region by much more recent models of the GEs and their partner EMDs. Varying types of motive power in this region tend to come and go, but this next pair has been down here for a hot minute, and bringing to showcase a quite uncommon occurrence in the Bone Valley, 2 trains meeting at a signaled siding. Coming out of Mulberry Yard, branching on to the siding at IMC, is train B371, engines light, running south to New Wales to pick up an empty train. They'd have to wait for B307 to clear the main line limits on the Valrico sub before they could get a signal and track authority down to Edison Junction and then New Wales.
One number of 77595. Today's 8091425, location SB840.5. B37114 to 3148. Eastwood, Circle Line 1A. Out on Main, southwide, back to the main, both directions. Between the SAS North End IMC main track and North Bradley Yard, the main track. Circle Line 1B, up and on main track, both directions. Between NAS South End Ridgewood main track and the milepost AX 879.4 main track, over.
2 verbal permission slips from Jack's dispatch and a green light ahead would give B371 clearance down to New Wales.
The second part of their EC1 track permission granted them authority down to milepost AX879.4, which is the end of track on the Valrico subdivision near downtown Fort Meade. Once 371 picks up their empty train at New Wales, they'll be on the way south to the mine at South Fort Meade to pick up a loaded train of wet rock phosphate to haul back to the processing plant at New Wales.
What's up, man? That's cool.
With a cool crew at the control this evening, I'd follow the B371 towards New Wales just a little bit, though I wasn't going to be on their tail for too long tonight, as I had places to be this evening. So once the medium clear signal was knocked down at IMC, I'd follow twice more down to Nichols and back to Lawast where we caught B307 before we'd call it a day. While this is no longer true 2 days before Christmas now that I'm editing this, the 3148 and 7588 were the Mulberry power set for a good 3 months at the time I shot this. So while motive power tends to come and go, these two stuck around for a while. Alas, this was the last movement that I'd shoot this evening, though I had another class to attend at Polk State the following Saturday, and so I'd be trackside once again after that class concluded.
Shoo! 1 week later. How y'all doing? I'm back, trackside. Chose to call it a night early last Saturday. I called it a night and figured maybe we'd have another shot this week, and sure enough we do. Out here at Kathleen, bit of a ways from the Bone Valley, but figured I'd tack this in here because this is a unique one that's coming. We got CO40 for Orlando. I'll talk about it in a moment, but CSX 4720 is on a lead. That's one of the special locos that they painted for the company, and I'll talk about that too here in a minute. But figured we'd snag this one not too far out of the way from Bartow, so...
Alright, enough talking from me. I've got things to say. After debating with myself for about an hour on where I wanted to actually catch this thing based on where the sun would be when the train arrived and the scenery that would be available for a photograph, I eventually decided on Oak Avenue in Kathleen. It's the location of a rather peaceful neighborhood side street at Ivy Branch Lane, and is also the location of the Kathleen holdout, the absolute signal just before Lakeland. I had had enough lecturing for the day in my class the hours prior, so I chose to keep myself away from the crowds that were going to be out for this one further south. And while possibly mundane to some, I personally found this spot to be quite unique and peaceful as CO40 breaks the silence with a trainload of coal for the OUC power plant at Stanton Energy Center. Unit coal trains this far south in the United States in and of themselves are a dying art, but what was up front is what really drew all the folks out this evening. Locomotive 4720 is an EMD SD70 MAC locomotive that CSX painted earlier this year to commemorate their One CSX initiative. Headed by the now dethroned CEO Joe Heinrichs, the One CSX initiative is a corporate branding by CSX emphasizing unity, collaboration, inclusion, and respect among employees, unions, and customers. At least that's the definition that Wikipedia gives me. I've heard different things from different people on how legit this stance actually is from the company, especially seeing the recent management changes, but alas, all we can do from the bystander's perspective is admire the pieces of artwork that the railroad has put on for us to see. And there would be many folks trackside for this piece of artwork tonight. Train CO40, on the other hand, plays an arguably much more important role, delivering raw power to the OUC power plant in Orlando. At least for the time being, before the corporate folks convert the plant to natural gas and/or solar, this is the stuff that keeps the lights on and the electricity flowing in the greater Orlando area. Without these trains arriving to Orlando every week, area residents would not have running water, electricity, lights, and most importantly in Florida, air conditioning. It's a train of high importance, like many others that run the rails of the Sunshine State. Another one that he'd be meeting just south of us in Lakeland. Intermodal out of Tampa was now coming our way, and so I chose to stay put here in Kathleen, as the spot was still quite unique and put into perspective that Florida railroads are not tabletop flat like your first model train set. While it may be in quite a few places, looks can be deceiving, and in many cases it takes an experienced operating team to know where the grades are, and a first-time operator may not even notice the track is rising until their train begins to slow. Though I'd say the experience range could vary a bit with tonight's IO-44 from Tampa, a very lackluster train this evening, so I'd be surprised if these guys even noticed the grades here as they soared through at 50 miles an hour.
Yeah, not much to write home about. Speaking of home, I'm gonna start heading that way. Coming for the ride? Of course you are.
The ride home would yield one more train after sunset in downtown Bartow. It would be another Bone Valley train, one that I wasn't expecting to see this evening, but the timing just so happened to work out as I rolled through the city limits. With a bit of an ache in my stomach and one in my head screaming pull over and get this train, I pulled into the parking lot of Sonny's Barbecue in downtown Bartow, conveniently positioned directly adjacent to the Valrico subdivision at the North Broadway Avenue crossing. I sat in the parking lot and placed a to-go order on my phone as I waited for the train to approach, and pretty soon a ding went off, but it wasn't on my phone and it wasn't for the food. Now on a steady roll southward, the good old 7588 and 3148 pull an empty B371 southward for the mine at South Fort Meade. This is the same job we caught the week before, engines light coming out of IMC and running to New Wales. This is now the train having picked up their empty consist and running south to the mine. It'll be well close to midnight before these guys return through here with their loaded train for New Wales. But how unique a shot this was, as it was the first time ever that I've been able to capture a rolling train and Sonny's Barbecue, one of the most popular railfan eateries, in the same shot. It was right about this time also that the buzzer finally went off on my phone saying my to-go order was ready, and so I threw the gear in the car, walked inside, grabbed the food, ate in silence, and made the drive home, as I'd have to be up bright and early to get back to work at the museum the following morning. An event season for said museum was growing closer, and so I'd be held away from the tracks for quite some time afterward. That is, until I was able to slip away on a Monday evening to catch a few trains a bit closer to home on the Palmetto subdivision. It's now the evening of October 20th, and we're sat beside the tracks on Morgan Farm Road in Sun City, Florida, at the site of what used to be Morgan Farm, and right across the tracks they used to host a multitude of local vendors that would serve fantastic milkshakes. Unfortunately, this is just a memory that I'm calling upon from 2021 and prior. I'm not sure what happened to these folks, but it's been quite a few years since I've seen anybody set up across these tracks selling anything. In a world full of change, sometimes the only things that stay constant are the trains. And such is so in this case, as we'd set up quickly for northbound train L783 returning from Port Manatee. A Monday through Friday train, L783 originates out of Yeoman Yard at Tampa, switching local customers on the final mile deliveries all the way down as far as Palmetto. They're returning towards Tampa now with a hefty train of boxcars that they've just picked up at the yard at Port Manatee. Speaking of Port Manatee, the train that we are destined to see this evening is also headed that way, though L783 would be the one getting in the way. Following the L783, a couple zip codes north to the siding at Big Bend. Just south of downtown Gibsonton and the Alafia River by about 2 miles, Big Bend is the lead track off of the Palmetto subdivision into the Big Bend Spur that hosts spur tracks for the Ardent Mills facility, Big Bend Power Station, and Mosaic Big Bend. On the Big Bend Spur is also National Gypsum, a company that creates drywall products out of recycled phosphogypsum, a byproduct of the phosphate mining industry. They'd have a few cars loaded with gypsum drywall ready to go north this evening, and L783 would be picking those cars up out of the industry tracks. Unfortunately, in the process, they'd have to leave the bottom half of their train extended out of Big Bend siding and over the main line switch, blocking the path of our southbound train, B307. And because I lost all of my radio recordings from this evening, I have no story to tell via the static chatter of the crews, and so I'm just gonna have to skip the 45 minutes or so that I sat at the end of the dead-end street waiting for 783 to move. Eventually the switching concluded though, and 783 got the entirety of their train off of the main line and into the Big Bend siding. By that point, however, B307 had already been on the main line between the switches and waiting for about a half hour. So the crew, now perhaps understandably impatient with the switch now lined for their move and only 60-something empty cars in tow, had nothing holding them back now, and so just like that they were off with a baffling swiftness. This is yet another instance of the new Port Manatee Wet Rock train. After an early afternoon departure out of the Ridgewood plant this day, they'll be arriving at Port Manatee shortly to pick up their next load of phosphate ore freshly mined by the Misquimayo Company off the western shore of Peru. The imported rock will then be processed at Ridgewood into finished phosphate fertilizer. Arriving at Port Manatee Yard, the train creeps forward slowly. They'll have to line all of the switches in this yard manually as the entire Palmetto subdivision to Bradenton is dark territory, nothing dispatcher controlled down here. The best we've got on this line are the remote control switches like the ones up at Big Bend. Such technology hasn't blessed Port Manatee yet. After dropping the empties off on the side, the locomotives head back to the other end of the yard to hook on to their loaded train, ready and waiting to head north. Now with their EMD SD70 in the lead, the two loaded cuts would be stacked together before the train would take off north for Ridgewood. Phosphate was now off and running, but not quite yet. The conductor of the train had been left behind at Port Manatee to reset the switches after the full train had cleared, and as I've seen become tradition with this job, the conductor would get a ride back up to the head end of the train at Cockroach Bay Road where the train would be waiting. So I'd get a head start myself and stop off the side to refuel at the new Circle K in Sun City. New as in built within the last few years, sometime around the time that progress became dreaded. We're about 600 feet from that Cockroach Bay road crossing, so I'd see the train pull right up to a stop as I gassed up the Explorer. My refueling was done within the next minute, so I hopped back on the highway before the conductor made it to us, and I continued northward on 41 for some better lighting. Stopping quite a ways further, just past Big Bend in downtown Gibsonton. One of my favorite and nostalgic spots along the Palmetto subdivision, just south of the Alafaya River Bridge. The lighting here is about as good as it's gonna get during the night on the Palmetto sub, so this is where I stuck it out for the last shot of the night. And once these guys get through Tampa and into the Bone Valley, there is next to no light along the route whatsoever until Mulberry and ultimately the industrial lights under the chemical processors at Ridgewood.
So this is where I'd conclude the evening, as the museum would once again be calling my name bright and early the next morning. Speaking of the museum, here's a quick clip of one of our Pumpkin Patch Express trains from this year's season heading south across Dickey Road. I managed to grab this video of the train crossing Dickey Road on the final run for the season. CF7204 doing the honors southbound. That arguably beautiful chord of notes that 204 is playing is coming from my mixed cast P5 horn, recently featured in a video I did all about train horns that I painted and refitted myself. For you horn fanatics out there, the combo on this mixed cast unit is a number 1, 3, and 5 old cast with a 2 and 4 new cast bells. The Pumpkin Patch Express is one of many things that have taken up the majority of my time in this last quarter of the year, but within the following week I'd be on a road trip to Jacksonville to meet with my buddy Christian after quite some time, and to do some miscellaneous train watching in the North Florida and South Georgia areas. He's already got a full-length video out for the entire weekend, and I'll have a full-length video coming out of one of our days here fairly soon, but for this video I'll throw in a couple clips of the unique trains from that trip that won't make it into the video that I'm doing. At milepost S690 is the tiny town of Waldo, Florida. Once an Amtrak station, and still being such, but only for the road route of Amtrak, Waldo is one of those tiny yet still growing communities along US 301 between Folkestone and Tampa. We actually made it all the way to Waldo from the north this morning as we were following a southbound M441 headed to Tampa. The power set chosen by Waycross to pull Tampa's merchandise this morning were two flared radiator SD70s, a rather uncommon sight on CSX, and although the Huntington rebuild program means that the active number of these is growing, this was still too good of an opportunity for us to pass up this morning. Screaming through the trees with that raw diesel-electric power. We followed this train from Baldwin all the way down to Citra this morning, getting quite a few shots along the way, but perhaps understandably, this shot was my favorite out of them all, and that's why I'm including it here. Now, the M441 that we're seeing here is actually symboled from the previous day. There must have been a delay getting out of Waycross the night before, because we're actually seeing the 441 from the day prior. Reason being is that later on this day we'd be up in the Waycross area and we'd catch another M441, this one being for the present day. Though the date on the train may have changed, the train's symbol and motive power are much the same, as M441 now cruises southbound past the south end of Race Pond. With more merchandise traffic for Tampa, another flared radiator SD70 would be put on lead of the train southbound for the Sunshine State. I'm including this clip also not just for the irony of two of the same trains having the same power in the same day, but also for what occurred right after, which is kind of neat. Trains often run pretty closely together, especially if they're running in the same direction. And the signals at South Race Pond would put on that show this evening as another train was right on 441's tail. Within 30 seconds of 441 physically clearing the signal mast, the signal comes up to a lunar white restricting. Because this is an absolute signal, we know that another route has been physically lined for another train, and should that train have physically been right behind us at this point, they could pass this signal not exceeding restricted speed. In other words, don't go too fast as to where if 441 were to stop, you wouldn't run into the back of them. The aspect basically means only proceed at a speed at which you can stop your train in half the distance you can see ahead and never in excess of 15 mph. And while the trains often run closely, they usually don't run that closely. And for that reason, 441 was a few signal blocks ahead with room for the aspect to have improved by the time the southbound CO41 arrived on scene.
CO41 is Evansville, Indiana to Orlando, more coal for Stanton Energy Center. The Orlando Utilities Commission is one of about 3 power companies in the state of Florida that still receive coal by rail, or coal at all for that matter. Though I hear that there are a couple of power companies in the state that are beginning to receive shipments by rail once again. So that's not only a good sign for rail business, but that might also be a future venture for me to explore in future videos. Who's to say at this point, but it's good to see Orlando still receiving shipments while they're still here. That's all that I'll include here from our Halloween trip up north, because once I made it back home, event season at the museum would kick into high gear. All of November would be spent decorating for Christmas, and almost all of December would be spent running Christmas, and making Christmas happen for the thousands of riders that visit the museum every season. Turns out that the season came and went, and I didn't shoot anything on my camera throughout the entirety of Christmas, apart from these last few videos that I'll show you here.
Good afternoon, friends. Welcome back to the museum. Closing up shop here on the 23rd of December. We just finished up the North Pole Express this previous night, and that's it for the year pretty much. I just did my final track inspection for the year. Just got back on the crane, all was good. Just started getting the lights off the locomotives, and I figured before I closed up for good, I'd give you all a quick walk around for my video of the good old 100 now that it is finished. I'm sure the majority of you who watch my videos also watch my buddy Christian's videos, Multicolor Films. If not, you're missing out because he posts way more than I do now, and he now has a video up of us operating this thing for one of my other Christmas time track inspections. So to see this thing in action, check out his channel and his giant holiday rail fanning video that includes some fantastic footage from Folkestone's Winter Watch and some other holiday themed events around the state that I just don't simply have the time to go do myself. So, but at any rate, this is the 100 all done. We got the number 1 engine, so this is the number 2 on the rear, the 3306Bs that were mentioned. Those are the prime movers in here. The number 1 on the south side had a leaking radiator, as I also mentioned. So we got that taken out the front and rebuilt for $4,500. So engine 1 is now good to go. And for the most part, we've sorted out everything on the number 2. So again, as I might have mentioned by now, next summer will be the official debut for this loco on the public trains, as this will save us a lot of fuel when pulling the short Willow Express runs during the summer months. Looks very good in the sunlight. Did a bit of a fix up on the Leslie RS2B horn myself, and we're just very happy to see this thing done. As I've told many people, I didn't think I'd live to see the day I saw this thing get new paint, but here we are. And again, I know this video is a very random compilation that I'm really just throwing together in these last few days that I have spare before the end of the year, but hopefully you guys can get a kick out of this stuff. And I've got one more thing up my sleeve that a buddy and I have planned out, so if you will, please jump eastward with me to the Mosaic Railroad.
It's now Christmas Day 2025, and what better way to see the holiday through? Tucked back in the county of Southern Polk is a railroad that most bypassers would completely overlook. The Mosaic Company doesn't just make fertilizer, they run their own trains, and occasionally a holiday-spirited employee or two takes advantage. Decked out this season in beautiful holiday illuminance are Mosaic locomotives number 3801 and 3802, sister EMD GP38-2s. While the history on these two isn't well known, they won't fade into history in any short time. These two earned their keep at Mosaic multiple times each day, shuttling the sometimes 80-car consists between Agrock and Four Corners. At the interchange between CSX and Mosaic is Agrock, a 5-track staging yard where trains of freshly mined phosphate ore are sidelined and prepped for pickup by CSX. This evening, an empty cut has just arrived back from the processors at New Wales. Mosaic would complete the return to the mine by moving these cars 9 miles over their own rails to the beneficiation plant where they'll be reloaded. plume of exhaust, the empties are off into the remote wilderness, as the Bone Valley Phosphate region is always active, night, day, or Christmas time. Most people tend to prefer Old Florida until they realize just how remote Old Florida is. On this cool December night, there is absolutely nothing out here besides us and the train, the ground ahead illuminated only by our 12-volt batteries and Christmas lights. The 10-mile-per-hour trip back to Four Corners is one of the shortest but most remote runs in this area of Florida. The shuttle moves can occur at any time of the day or night, often based on when CSX delivers or picks up. This job in particular is not one for those of us who have any kind of separation anxiety. Sporting holiday cheer or not, your method of transportation is plunged into darkness as soon as you leave the yard. The only highway road crossing on this railroad between the plant and Ag Rock is at State Road 37, sparsely lighted but remote nonetheless. Unfortunately or not, we be the only ones trackside to see this festive mine run creep west. After a few hours layover outside the yard limits at Four Corners waiting on the next train to finish loading, the festive EMDs now couple to a train set of loaded cars ready to return to Ag Rock. With the motive power now on the train, the yard switcher for Four Corners, MP15 number 212, can pull the previously hauled empty cut into the clear. They'll likely begin loading this cut with the next batch of wet rock right away, though likely not finishing before the crew goes off duty at 6 a.m. Though once the empties were clear of the yard lead, it meant our loaded train now had a clear track back to Ag Rock. And alas, now past midnight, the two EMDs worked their hardest to get the loaded train back up to speed. The site at Four Corners at which we're departing now is one of two rail-served beneficiation plants in Florida's Bone Valley. The plant itself is where the phosphorus slurry that is pumped in from the phosphate mines is washed and filtered to remove the particles of clay and sand that are naturally mixed with the phosphate rock when it's dug out of the earth. The still wet product, adequately nicknamed wet rock, now travels by rail to a processing plant. This cut will eventually return via CSX to the New Wales chemical plant. The ominous sound of electric pumps moving the phosphorus slurry to the plant hum nearby as the EMDs struggle to pull the phosphate back through the darkness. The darkness that is just barely broken by city power as the train rolls back across State Road 37 in the dead of an old Florida night. Alrighty folks, hope y'all enjoyed this little recap. I'm glad I was kind of able to throw something holiday themed kind of on the end of it here, but that is going to do it for this video as well as 2025. Apart from a trip we're going to be on in a day or so up to a very remote region of Kentucky to see some CSX coal action, and I'll have a documentary coming out for all that here in a few months or something. But on that note, I do want to make a note that this recent hiatus and lack of uploads from me may become more common going forward, just seeing as my life now is moving in a very different direction.
There's a lot more things going on, more responsibility with a railroad, yada yada. But by extension, YouTube has just become a very minimal priority for me at this point. Though I know there's a number of you out there that always have and still do enjoy to see the content that I do put out when I can, and so case in point, when I have the time and ability, I like to still get out and see these things and put videos together, whether it be formal or informal, like in this case. But as with many things in 2025, which quite literally is a year that has come and passed with me barely knowing what's happened, I'm grateful for still a number of things that have happened in that time, including your viewership. That has been very prevalent throughout this year, and I'm glad to see so many of you still around watching this stuff. And on that note, I want to wish all of you a very Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year, whatever you celebrate, and I hope to see y'all again very soon, whether that be in a few days or a few months. I plan on putting some more stuff out there when I can, so thank you again so much for watching. Be safe, and I'll see y'all sometime soon on the Sunshine State Rails.